Welcome to the Why God Why podcast. We have a very exciting episode right now because we're recapping a whole series on credibility of Christianity. It's been wonderful, truly. Yeah. It's been great. So before we dive into all the details, let's do high-level recap of all of the episodes. Gage, why don't you tell us about those?
Great. Yeah, we had some awesome topics. We started out this series with Dr. Steve Pelton asking, why are Christians so afraid of science? We then had Linley Ali asking, why would I believe in God? Kind of more the philosophical, is there even a philosophical rational explanation for God? Then we had Brittany Dicus, good friend of Alyssa Matz, talking about why do I have to pray? Honestly, does it even work? We then had Brian Laritz, who is such an eloquent speaker, talking about why aren't we more diverse in our churches? Then Dr. Russell Moore, editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, talking about why does it seem Christianity has been co-opted by politics. It's one of my favorites.
Yikes. So good.
Then Sasha Halleck, who's an incredibly talented artist living down in New York City, asked the question, why has the church stifled art? We then had Brian Lee asking, why do churches do more harm than good? We had Nijay Gupta, why are Christians so hypocritical? Then Jason Cusick, why does Christianity make us anxious? And finally, Drew Johnson, circling back to where we started with a science-y episode, do Christians really think Genesis is literal?
Good job, team. I love those questions.
So good.
You know, one thing I just want us to kind of do, let's talk a little bit, maybe for 2 or 3 minutes, about why we chose the credibility of Christianity. I'm actually going to throw to Aaron, and then I think Gage would be good to kind of hear.
I was amening. I hear these titles, and I'm like, yes. And the reason I'm excited about that saying yes is because these are questions I've heard. I'm someone who's like scrolling YouTube. I'm looking through atheist and Christian debates. I'm looking at social influencers who are renouncing God or believing in him. And there are a lot of these questions in there. And almost, if you work on church staff, they're almost like knife. It almost feels like you're getting stabbed. But I feel like this is the place where we need to have those questions. And for a lot of us, whether we're far along in our journey, early on, we just want to make fun of Christians, so we're listening to this, whatever it may be. These are questions we need, especially in today's world, to have at least thought through, to at least have some formed ideas to enter the ring. Because I even think I'm the student pastor. Our students are getting bombarded with these through TikToks, through whatever it be. We are confronted with these hard questions very early on in life. Maybe some of our listeners are in their 60s. They're like, wow, I'm just getting to these now. Well, these are now the questions of our, the questions that can make Christianity feel either very credible or like the silliest thing on earth. So I hear that we're tackling these questions and I get really excited because I think these are pivotal questions for our faith journeys, especially today. So yeah, and I think it's also, this is my thought, where Christianity can actually rise above other worldviews is because there are some very thoughtful, very thought out answers and responses to these things. So there you go. The credibility of Christianity, I think it's wise to continue these conversations and to get them out there and not hide from them.
Yeah.
Gage, you really were the point person that got us on this series. So, I mean, everybody kind of need to know Gage really led us through some research. We sweated and fought and did all these. Now that it's over, I'm kind of curious, what excites you about these conversations and what are you kind of leaving with?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the shout out there. It was fun helping organize this series, and I'm really glad we asked the questions we did. The goal, the hope was really, what are the first questions that come to mind for someone kind of coming in from a critical or evaluative or just new perspective to Christianity that would say, ooh, it seems interesting, but what about this? And then also, I think one reason I'm really glad we had these conversations and my heart for these episodes was to just address the very valid challenges people in our day and age would have towards the church, kind of because of the fruit of the church, like any group of people, being full of broken, imperfect people, but then the consequence being of sometimes very public, what we would call sin, very public brokenness, dysfunction, harm done by the church that would cause people to question the credibility of it. So I'm really glad we got to not pretend those don't exist, but take a few episodes to pause and ask, what about that?
Yeah.
And to that point, I feel like your generation, our generation, maybe like these things started coming out.
Yeah.
Like they weren't coming out really before they could get swept under the rug. So they started coming out. So the trust in the institution of church just tanked. It's just, I don't trust any institutions. I don't trust, especially not this one that's claiming these high moral values and then is on the news every other week for these terrible things happening. And I feel like there's a whole, you may be listening to this, a whole group of people who just felt this hypocrisy, this distrust in the church. So where do we go from there? And we got to have the conversation. So love that.
So let's have some fun. I think that's a great setup. You all know this, but the most downloaded episode was
Drum roll.
Prayer.
by Brittany Dicus. It was prayer. Little surprising to all of us. We're recording this in March, so I feel like, she was the George Mason of podcasts that made it to the Final Four. But
Nice, Peter.
you like that? It was good.
Precursor to,
So, and Brittany's very accomplished, and but like I think it was the topic that we knew it was an important topic. We just didn't realize it was going to resonate that much.
Yeah.
Amanda, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm wondering if it was the follow-up question.
Yes.
The parentheses. Yep. Honestly, does it even really
Does it even
matter?
work?
Make a difference? Work.
Does prayer even work?
Yep.
Because how often are we found with and met with silence when we pray? And it's hard to navigate through that, especially if you're going through something very difficult, whether it be with the church itself, people in it, or you found yourself in a very difficult season. I would assume that possibly Christian or not, you're saying, what is the actual point of prayer? Because I don't see it or I don't feel it. And I think one of my favorite things that Brittany said was, please don't feel the need to come to prayer and to God polished and cleaned up. No one needs that. And God certainly doesn't ask that of us. So just be real and honest in what you're praying. And I was very grateful for that truth. I think it's necessary.
Yeah, it reminds me, someone once said to me, they're like, is it better for someone, if someone's going through a hard time, if you walk up to them and say, hey, I'm with you, I'm praying for you? Or is it better for you to not say anything and actually pray for them?
100% pray.
And that kind of reveals, like, do we believe God is working? Just an encouraging thing. Again, student minister over here. This is a month ago or so, I had our students write down honest prayers about the things they're going through. And we're talking 11-year-olds to 18-year-olds. And what I was expecting is what I did in high school, which is just like, I don't know, what prayer did we sing before my meal in third grade? I didn't really have any good, my prayer life was not very strong. So I'm expecting these like one word, God help me with my homework, that's what I'm expecting. And I get back these like cards that are index cards filled front and back by like middle school boys and with legitimate prayers and cries out to God. And I'm like, what is happening? So there is, sometimes we think of that as like something people really don't really want to engage with. I don't know. But in that sense, I'm almost not surprised that prayer rose to the top of our, like, talking with the creator of the universe is very important. So I just want to encourage people with that. I've seen that trend.
And I'm also kind of wondering too, we live in a very spiritual society. And people want to be connected. And I think as a planning team, as we prayed and thought about these topics, we're thinking it's an election year. Science is becoming a big topic, but you almost wonder if, because the desire to be spiritual, it's how do I pray? And I'm looking at it in our studio. We actually have Amen beyond where Amanda and Aaron are. And so I think it probably just trends well that there's this desire to be spiritual, and how can I connect that to the God of the universe?
I just had a conversation today, right before this, like 15 minutes before we stepped in here, with a mom who is kind of saying the same. She's like, we're just trying to figure out our spiritual journeys,
Sure.
And God has been there in the past. And my kids, she said this, my 15-year-old, I just learned, wakes up and prays every day. They don't attend church. They do. I'm like, what? Yeah. We're just we're in a different place than maybe we realize. And I think it's actually a really cool place to be, especially for the church. So prayer.
Well, let's pray for our next topic. So our next topic, I wish you could all, maybe someday we'll record a planning session just so that you can see it. So Amanda's like, this series is going to have a science episode.
Please don't put me in a science
Please don't put me in a science episode. So
I just feel like I have so much. Here's the explanation. I have so much to learn.
Which would make you great for a science episode.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So God bless Michelle Lennox and Brett Hirsch, because I interviewed them for science. I'd encourage you to all to go back. I'm with you. Like, I just, it's outside my lane, but we'll talk more about that. I'll say I got the most emails about the science episode. And I was like, no one emailed John and Aaron about it. But anyways, but we'll come back to that. Aaron, let's kind of start positively, because we did get our producer Nathan and his dad Chet resonated with it. Like, why don't you go, how did you feel about that episode when it came out?
Yeah, so I thought it was a cool episode, just for the sheer fact of being able to breach the topic of science and even get out some taboo words like evolution. I mean, I totally get it. That word is like Satan in the, like growing up. I remember I went and watched I went with a church group to a movie theater where they were showing 7-Day Creation films. I'm like watching it. I remember someone saying to me like, well, what do you believe? I'm like, I'd rather believe what the words of the Bible than believe in my own thing. I like remember these like really intense emotions and feelings towards it. And I don't necessarily think that posture is helpful for when we're all trying to hone and discover truth that God has put out there. So I think
posture of what, like the emotional.
Like you say a word and oh my gosh, okay, I have to walk out of the room or else I'm going to scream at you. Do you know what I mean? And I think for a long time that has been that's what I've encountered, at least in the church. Generally you stay away from it. Like, it's one of those things. So I enjoyed hearing a thoughtful Christian thinking through his views on science, and someone who is in the field of science, thinking through, all right, I'm learning things about the created world. I'm reading my Bible. I'm talking with God. How do I wrestle through this? How can I even talk to people about this? Because these are actual questions I have. And I think we need to have those conversations. And as someone, I love science. Every time I walk outside, I'm like, God, it's incredible. Like, like, look at this leaf. It turns the light into food for its, like all this stuff. So I'm loving it. So any conversations we can have about the natural world are so exciting to me, because I feel like there's so much about God and his beauty and his design for us that we can learn through it. So That being said, I was glad to know that we are having those conversations. So yeah, that was a big win for me. You said you got a lot of emails.
Well, I think first of all, I'm actually going to channel my inner Gage Hunt. If you spend time with Gage Hunt,
Gage is like,
he'll say, I'm just nudging you. So Gage was like, I just want to nudge us to start with the science episodes. I'd love to hear your thoughts since you nudged us in that direction.
Oh, yeah. Well, I felt that way because I think when you do ask that question, which we did to come up with the episodes, what are the first hesitations when people are asking the question, is Christianity a credible worldview, or is that worth, some weight, in my own opinion, worth considering deeper? I think there are a lot of misconceptions about the relationship between the church and the scientific community that have been popularized both by, folks who have some real baggage with the Christian church and are intentionally trying to draw a gap, but also, like you were saying, sometimes to the response of Christians who maybe feel triggered by a question or a statement that feels like a challenge to what they believe or have been taught, even if they sat longer with the idea or the question, they would realize, no, this is much more deeply reconciled than I imagined. I just think it jumps because of that, because of the general misperception that there is a divide there. It was one we had to tackle pretty early to say, no, we're really going to ask these questions that people have about credibility.
Yeah.
I'll just toss in too, I really, like I mentioned running through the episode list, we kind of started and ended with it, which wasn't necessarily planned up front, but I'm really glad we did, because our conversation there at the end with Drew was really, really cool. I enjoyed that a lot. And I said several times on the episode, it felt like a whole semester of college that we walked through, but he just richly unpacked the deep cohesion between the Christian worldview, even the ancient Jewish worldview, and the sciences, and how it was actually Christianity and even ancient Judaism, those cultural arenas where the sciences were perhaps more platformed and supported than ever before. So I enjoyed that conversation a ton.
well, oftentimes it is the pursuit of truth because of our faith in God that pushes forward the boundaries of art, science, like of all the disciplines. So it's cool to hear that. And I did want to say, for the science thing, we did get a lot of emails. I also heard of a lot of people being like, all right, I'm going to read the book and just see what it says. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a huge win.
Which book?
Whether it's Francis Collins, The Language of God, that's the one I really remember.
Okay.
But just as Christians, to be willing to be like, you know what, I'm willing to have that conversation. I'm also willing to open up a book and just see, is this going to point me towards God? Is this going to be revealing truth about God? Or am I going to read it and thoughtfully think, you know what, maybe not. But if we can get to a place as Christians and as churches to be open to those conversations, be open to reading, be open to having actual back and forth discussion, huge. I think it's awesome. So
I think that's more of a balanced approach, is like, I'm open to not only hearing someone, but also recognize what Steve alluded to is the Bible explains who and why, but science explains what and how. I love that he said that. There's so much more we can learn, which I believe in God who cannot be put into a box. There's so much more I can learn about him. So, yeah.
Well, I guess this is a fun time for me to respond to some of those emails. So let me first start out by saying something really important. If you have your phones, Google Francis Collins, N.T. Wright, play the guitar. It's a great video. N.T. Wright's a theologian. So I think when I have these conversations with people, I try to stay in my lane. That's kind of being married to Robin Englert, who's a counselor. We talk about this a lot, about how she's in the mental health field. And then also, I'm a pastor. So I'm very careful what I say about anxiety because I don't even know how to diagnose it. I just try to respect that. So we got some feedback about the credibility of scientists. I was a little surprised by that. And I think it's a clean hit to say pastors have a credibility issue. That's the field I'm in. They're in the top 10, like least trusted. So I'm just kind of saying, like, person in a glass house doesn't throw a brick. But I think a lot of the conversation, the word evolution is a complicated, big word. And I think sometimes we don't slow down long enough to just, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Yep. Biggest question I was left with was, what is his definition of evolution? And just out of curiosity.
Yeah. And what was Drew Johnson's definition of evolution? What was a 6-day literal creationist definition of evolution? But here's where I want to go. I actually got invited to go to, it's ninth graders, right?
Yeah, ninth graders.
I got invited to go to a ninth grade small group with bless Ken Kennedy, so I had burgers, tater tots. I felt like, I was in Napoleon Dynamite. So we were talking about Genesis 1-2.
Wait, you just showed up, or did he?
He invited me.
Because of the science episode?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was specific. Okay.
Specific. They were studying the book of Genesis. Podcast happened to come out. This is what I know about Genesis 1 and 2. So there's 4 really, really important things for me. Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth. So ancient readers would have been flabbergasted
Right.
that there was no battle. Like if you read ancient creation stories, there's no battle. Just what? We think, the Tale of Two Cities, it was the worst of times in the best. No, like that's not even what the Bible does is more, crazy. The second thing about the creation account, which is day 4, which is the sun and the moon. Now, I know that there's a scientific conversation out there, and I want to acknowledge it, but I also just want to kind of go back to what I think the writer of Genesis is saying. The Egyptians worshipped the sun. Many of the cultures worshipped the sun, moon, and stars. So for the writer of Genesis to say, these are created, don't worship them. The third thing is human beings being created in the image of God. So you get to the image of God, which we talk about a ton. That literally in Hebrew was kings would set up vice regions. And he basically, the author, he or she said, basically, you are all vice regions of God. You are all these individuals. I think that's pretty powerful. And the last thing I'll say is, why is the Sabbath so important? Spends, the seventh day, God rested. Well, if you were people that work 7 days a week, and all of a sudden now, those 4 things, which talk to any commentator, not that they have nothing to do about science, but we are putting in our modern day questions to a passage that's not what the original audience was wrestling with.
Right. I often say Genesis 1 is not a scientific research, study or thesis project. And so, I even remember I was a senior in high school. We read Genesis 1 in public school, Brockport, New York. And I was so excited. My friends were going to all have to read the Bible, and we read Genesis 1. And my friend right next to me goes, well, that was ridiculous. He's like, you might as well throw pixie dust in the air because that was just a complete fairy tale. That's how they think. Because what they were looking for was then the atoms separated and the heating and the melting of the intense gravity caused it to explode. Like they were looking for a very modern scientific explanation from Genesis 1, which is just not all what it was going for. So then it's so God creates us to go discover his world, right? It's one of the great joys to be a scientist and uncover the secrets and the way he's designed it, and we get to learn more about him. So that's where it gets exciting. Let's keep talking about this.
Well, and just to toss it to Drew Johnson, because I think that this is really important. He made this phrase. He said, try to rewrite Genesis 1 to 11 just with that amount of words. And so even
say as much with the same amount of words.
Yeah. And so I think the author is after something different. And I just want to give like one encouragement. All right. I live in multiple worlds. I live in the conservative evangelical world. I live in the progressive upstate New York, Rochester world. And I guess I want to say this pastorally and kindly. If something's true, then what's happening inside of you every single time that you feel the need to fight it? I think one of my frustrations as a pastor is this feeling of if some theological tenet isn't said like the right way in the right tenor, and I guess I'm kind of concerned about that. And I've seen 6 day literalist things before. I think that there's some good things, but sometimes it's not even the content, it's just the approach that I think turns people off. And, I've made several jokes in multiple conversations. I go, if I say something about 6 day literal creation, no one comes and talks to me. It's almost, I don't know if it's checked the box. If I sniff the word evolution, I get like 6 emails. And I bring up that disparity because let's engage the topics, but I think one of the joys of being a non-scientist to engage this topic is if God is sovereign and over everything and truth is out there, and Genesis 1-11, there's not a ton of details. Be careful how we're sweating over some of this stuff. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
There you go. I'll just leave it there. Yeah. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Where are we going to go next?
Well, I think on our list was some of at one point we had the running title for the next series to be spicy questions. I feel like 2 of the episodes we talked about, both diversity and politics, were maybe 2 of the spicier ones of this series. Should we go there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
Oh, talk about topics where you bring them up and people just start you can feel it in your chest and the room is palpably. I was having a conversation with someone and he's like, we're not even close right now, but we need to be closer and closer on being able to have conversations about actual politics because we can't right now. We get in the room and the police are going to get called if you try to have thoughtful discussions about, wait, no, I'm actually genuinely interested in like what might be best and how can we apply biblical principles. Like I don't want to choose a side. I just want to learn and try to make informed decisions. So yeah, that topic, super spicy. As that's not what we landed on. Spicy, is that correct?
Yeah, we did not. That's
we'll throw to our next series at the end of this. But Amanda, when you think of those 2 episodes, I mean, what kind of stood out to you?
Well, with Russell Moore's podcast, I just took so many notes. And one thing that stood out to me was the view that people have that the church is pursuing the gospel as a means to another end. I mean, I'm kind of speechless in that. And actually I'm not. I have so many more questions for people who feel that way. Like I really want to hear from them. I want to know what
would those ends be? What did he talk about?
I think he was hinting towards, Christians using the gospel to get to political power.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And I would say it's not usually made explicit. It's more so that that power, the desire for influence, we can talk about the culture wars, there somehow we have fallen prey to the lie that the kingdom of heaven comes by political means. In this case, we have fallen prey to the lie of the zealots in first century Israel, Simon the Zealot, one of the disciples. And because of that, our framing, I think, is still, no, this is Christian mission, not Christian mission serving another end.
Right.
But it gets subtly twisted because that's our vision. And so Christian language, all these things, Nije talked about this too, is Christianity being thrown on as a wrapping paper or a bow over like your existing priorities, your existing heartstrings, your existing driving narratives. What needs to happen? What is the cause I need to throw my passion, my zeal behind? It's still a lot of people, what happens sometimes, Nije said, to jump to that episode in different cultures or places, is when the gospel's heard and then it's just thrown on as wrapping paper or a bow, your existing political zeal, your existing whatever it is, worldview just gets Christian language.
Yikes.
And so under the surface, what Russell was talking about was, I believe that's really what's driving, even if it still has that wrapping paper of Christian. They wouldn't say, oh, Christianity is serving my political agenda. But that's kind of what's happening because that narrative of, no, the kingdom's won by political power still has deeper roots in them, perhaps, than is immediately realized.
Especially in America, where, God bless America, this country founded on the principles of God, and it's slipping away. And oh my gosh, the way to bring God back is to put the right person in the White House, I don't know. I just feel like that's a very present reality and then you have Jesus or any of the first century Christians who just, I don't even know what they were thinking in that terms because they had no power,
Yeah.
Well, my brother and I talked about Christian nationalism and kind of like with science, we've encountered individuals who would say like it doesn't exist or something like that. And it's like, whether you think it exists or not, and I believe it does, so I just want to be clear, there's a perception out there that the church is more passionate about political ends than helping the poor, than living out the God, loving neighbors. So I want us to be careful because I'm not saying that that's not like true, and I'm not saying it's true. You have to deal with that perception. If that perception is out there, then the way that you live your lives on social media, the way you live your lives with the people in your neighborhood, like you have to be aware of that. And I'm sure that many of our listeners, they're struggling with this perception, real, fake, or somewhere in between, or overplayed, that Christians are super concerned about politics.
And I love that he said the best way to love your country is if your country isn't first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's the wrapping paper idea.
I agree.
It has to start. The gift is God, and where does He want to move us? And then I do want to add this. I was talking with someone. They're like, sometimes we swing too far the other. We have this like, I have my political agenda, and maybe even the church, and I've definitely seen it where I'm like, oh wow, they're really going hard on this, and it doesn't seem like they're going that hard on the gospel or like other things. Yeah. But we can swing to be like, the best thing we can do in a church is just stay out of it completely. Like never talk about it. Why does it even affect political anything? And I'm just wondering, it'd be cool to see Christians, and I think this has been done in the past, where we can be motivated by the love of God, love others, and work to creating a great community that reflects His image as well. Like, we can't completely disengage, even though it's, I think, easier for churches to completely disengage. You'll lose people on the edges, but, you're the silent majority, or I don't know what they call it. I might be taking that from a totally different context.
Well, and one of the reasons why I love serving at Browncroft is there are people that are Democrats and there are people that are Republicans. I was on a podcast Corey Nathan, and we were talking about that. I walk into a conversation, I have no idea what anybody kind of feels. And I think that that's powerful, because I think that that's the beauty of the gospel is we can vote differently and have different values, and we will accept the Bible as truth and wrestle with that truth. But that doesn't mean that we can't live with each other. And I want to kind of pivot back to one of my favorite moments of the series. I get kind of emotional thinking about it, but at the end of Dr. Loritz, and Brian was just so awesome, just to hear his perspective, to hear what he's done. But Alyssa Matz closes the episode with this story. Here she is doing kids check-in, and a family that's mixed race walks up and immediately feels this love. And they ask her, "Are you mixed race too?" And those are I love talking about it, but those are the moments that you just see the gospel, and you see in Revelation, I hope that I'm sitting with the Christians from Africa and Korea, and the Christians that worked in this political party. I mean, that is a compelling vision, even to the greatest of skeptics. I saw you get excited. I just wanted to, because that was a great moment, and it was their son, the way Alyssa greeted their son right afterwards. The father was like, "Hey, I know you have a mixed background because of the way you looked at and welcomed my son, and really appreciate that."
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And we don't get that. We don't get that if the churches we have don't reflect the diversity of the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah, his episode was incredible. Learned a ton from him.
Let's kind of do this. There's a few episodes we haven't kind of chatted about. Speaking of getting, I hang out with you, we get more emotional, but
Let the tears flow.
we're going to go back to that Paul and Jackie Staff episode with emotional, healthy spirituality. Anyways, the Nijay Gupta one kind of connected with all of them. The Brian Lee one on church leadership, there was a very powerful moment for you. Why don't you invite our listeners into that moment?
Yeah, that episode really hit me hard. I know people in my life who are really struggling with church hurt, and a couple of them are even sexual abuse situations. And Brian shared personally about his experience, which is a separate struggle than sexual abuse, but it was racism. And Peter at one point asked him, "Why are you still a Christian?" And the fact that Brian would say the church, I think, is still beautiful. It just, like I said in my response, it doesn't seem like it's fair. Like it should be that way. There's a lot of hurt that people can receive from seeing people's hurt. And for someone to themselves say that there's something redeeming about this, which is very powerful in that. Yeah. I really don't know what else to add to it, because it was just so profound. It was beautiful.
For me, it's a reflection of love that only comes from God.
Yep.
This covenant with his bride that extends beyond literally people tearing you down because of something you never, that when we see reflections of the love of God, we're moved and compelled. And I think that's what's so special is you just don't get that without the love of God.
Yeah.
You just can't find that outside of his people. And, so it's wonderful.
By the way, Nijay and Brian are like friends in real life. So there was one point where Nijay was like, and one of my students dealing with church hurt, that was him. So, but I mean, Gage, Gage is like really good at like helping you get to the next level. So like when he gives you like a compliment, like I feel like I gotta save those. But Gage, and we can kind of jump from Brian to Nijay, but you really resonated with the Nijay episode. You know, what were some of the things that really resonated with you on that?
Oh yeah, that's funny. When we were prepping for this episode, one of the outline questions we had was, what was your favorite episode? And this was kind of your way of segueing there, perhaps. It's funny, though I said that to you, and I truly, that episode I just thought was gold. I mentioned earlier the wrapping paper image. I thought that's brilliant. I think that captures so much of what let me dive a little deeper into that image. I actually wrote down the quote. One of the things at the end of that quote I love. Here's the full thing again, though. He said, sometimes what happens in a particular culture or community is they hear the gospel and then retain everything about their lives and just stick Jesus on it, like wrapping paper or a Christian bow. He goes on to say, when this happens, instead of people becoming counterculturally, strikingly, radically, beautifully weird, to nod to his new book, they either just, instead of being this countercultural community that only Jesus can make and bring together, they either just blend in unremarkably. It's like, oh, I'm Christian, but I'm cool. Like, we're the same. Like, there's nothing countercultural. There's nothing weird. I still have road rage, but I have a Jesus fish bumper sticker on my car.
Not the fish bumper sticker.
No, but maybe both. Or, and this, I thought this was, I audibly responded when I was listening to the episode in the car. He said, or they amplify the worst of society, the society they're in. And that makes total sense to me, because if you have your own, heartstrings, your own struggles, your own like frustrations with the world that are part of your culture, your own idols, we would call it sometimes, whether it's power in politics or something else, and you just put Christian wrapping paper on it and Christian lingo on it, what you've done is you've given your frustration religious credence.
Yeah. Oof.
Which makes it all the more powerful.
Yeah.
And if you haven't actually given that area to Christ, to unearth it and poke at it and like pull you out of what's trapping you, what's grabbing you in there, you just give it more power. I loved that. But I'll add, and that ties right along with it, to the question, what was your favorite episode? I was actually going to say the Dr. Moore episode, because I do think, to that point Nijay was making, that's probably the area, the politics, the power one, that is the greatest threat to deeper discipleship in our time and place in our nation, that chokes out the real work of the Holy Spirit, stops the fruits of the Spirit, because that's the idol of our time and place that we're so vulnerable to. So I love that we got to engage that, and I hope we get to more.
I'm going to throw to your favorites, but I do, these podcast episodes, maybe this is the wrong way to say it, they're kind of like my children. It's hard for me to pick a favorite. I can pick the ones that I wasn't on. No, I'm just kidding. But I do want to talk about Linley Ali's episode, because I think Linley, I'm actually going to meet him in person for the first time next week. But Linley's attitude when it comes to logic, it was a great second episode to kind of frame a Christian that lives with curiosity and a willingness to have the tough conversations. The place he works at in Jacksonville, people listened to the podcast and he had lunch with them. And, I think back to what you're saying about your favorite episode. There's a certain posture that I don't think Christians are taking. We're so focused on what we believe and the culture wars that Jesus just lived with he knew when to ask the hard questions. He knew when to tell people off. I mean, he also had the wisdom to throw the money changers. And as I listened to Linley talk through, growing up in Toronto and from a different culture and America, I think you all should listen to that, because the way and the posture of which he handles that question, why would I even believe in God? He kind of touches on some presuppositional apologetics, which is, let's really go there and work it out. So, all right, we'll go with Aaron, then we'll have Amanda close with her
I
favorite.
have two things. One, Brian Loritz. Why aren't we more diverse in our churches? The reason I think that's so powerful is I've noticed a lot of conversations I've had with people, the lack of diversity in churches is one of the primary just stumbling blocks. Like, how can I go into this place that's for everyone, quote unquote, and I walk into a congregation and I just see the same people copy and pasted across the pews, I think it's something, and of course, a lot of it does have to do with the way our cities are set up, and a lot of decisions that were made long before us that have put people of similar, whatever, in the same spaces. But I think that is one of the biggest areas that it is so clear that God's love is motivating hearts, because you literally don't get diversity anywhere else. Like, it is incredibly difficult to find a place where, and I'm going racially, you see people not just like existing in the same space, but being in community together, diversity of thinking, even, who have different views on this. We need that. And even it's fun. I'm a student in the student ministry right now. It's very, very, very difficult to find spaces where young and old can be in the same space together. And I think sometimes we as churches can really perpetuate this idea that separateness is like the most ideal for our spiritual growth. Hey, let's put all the teens over here, all the kids over here, all the adults over here, all the elderly over here, because we need that. But I think that's one of our greatest opportunities as a church, is to be like, to have someone walk in, see a kid talking to an elderly person next to someone who's from a different socioeconomic status. It just goes, it just blows your mind. You're like, where else? You don't see this in the YMCA, you don't see this in school, you don't see this anywhere. So I think from that angle, not in the sense of like it's just good to have different people from different ethnicities in the same space, but just the church being one body, one family, one together, like-minded, is just not being seen anywhere else. That's I think there's a huge opportunity there. And then one I didn't listen to, but I'm curious who did the interview, is the Sasha. How did that go? This is what was the title for that? Something about art, and it was cool, and it makes me want to listen to it.
Yeah, that was an awesome episode. Sasha Halleck, that was.
And why has the church stifled art?
Yes, that was the title. That was super fun. If I had more time to answer the last question, I would have wrote that one in there.
I'll take some time in there.
Are we going to do a final thoughts in this episode, or is this the time for that?
No, we'll do final thoughts.
Okay.
I feel pretty relaxed.
All right. Well, for that episode, I thought that was a great one, because maybe it's not an episode that immediately jumps to mind when you're asking about credibility, but especially as culture changes, especially as the younger generations age, I think this question is more and more poignant and more felt. And there's a recognition even that there's more, as culture grows more spiritual, like you were mentioning, there's recognition that there's more to the world than what we can see and measure. And so a spirituality that acknowledges that, affirms that, and says, in some sense, the truth of all things, the truth, the reality, deep truth, maybe what C.S. Lewis would call the deeper magic, is discernible in a variety of ways. And beauty and art is one of the ways we can start to discern and see the reality beneath the surface. And that is central in Christianity. That's, even if modernity has not always acknowledged it super well, or parts of the church in modernity haven't held that well. That's, I think, a big piece of credibility, is your worldview accounts for the mystery that we all kind of recognize in reality.
I want to just add to that. That was one of my favorite episodes, kind of hard to have a favorite, but Sasha gave me a lot of hope because art, I think actually more than just the church, but to culture, forces us to be countercultural. It forces us to slow down. And I think that even his posture, the way that he handled things, like there's a lesson of kind of sitting in front of a beautiful painting and not going anywhere. And when it comes to prayers and the practices, and as you and John talked about it, I wonder if in this age of information, hustle, productivity, if it's the artists that are going to lead us back.
Yes.
So, we talk about these beautiful Christian things as Sabbath. We are not factories or machines. We are human beings. So I would just echo that.
Yeah.
Amanda, we're like holding on for this like last one. So.
Oh, and I'm not even going to answer it. My favorite?
Yeah.
I can't. I'll say this. I learned a ton from Brian Loritz.
Yeah.
Especially when he was very honest and open about his homophobic views. That he said what changed me the most was having abiding friendship with a lesbian couple. And that it didn't change his convictions, but it deepened his empathy and compassion. And my lovely friend Gage and I have talked about this, that I have a hard time engaging in conversations with people who view something so different than me. Because in the past, I've been very legalistic in my views, and I've hurt people along the way. So now entering in a different space where I've had plenty of time for God to work on my heart, I'm so curious now. Like, I really just want to know what people are going through, what they've experienced. And I would hope that my empathy has grown. But yet I can still hold on to my convictions as a Christian. Like, I can still say, I believe this, but now I see what you're going through. And I love you even more than I did before. I was very humbled in hearing that. And I can really, truly relate. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. That was a lot.
Yeah.
So before we get to our final thoughts, let me just kind of help our listeners out. We have a new series. We're going to take April off, if that's okay. We're going to Sabbath. We're going to slow down. Basically, all three of the people here, I'm usually like, every week. And they're all like, you can take a break.
Yes.
So we're going to take a break, but then we're going to come back in May with questions of our day. There's a variety. Some of these issues we're going to come back to. They're kind of reframed and new guests. Some of them we actually have like 2 guests for. So that's going to be crazy. We don't want to leave you hanging too much. We are doing a standalone episode with Drew Dick. So that's going to come out after this one. So stay tuned. It's a little, I don't want to call it bonus because bonus doesn't actually count to our episode number. I want it to be like, it's a standalone with Drew from the West Coast. So that's our announcement from there. But final thoughts. Let's just go around the circle. Aaron, credibility of Christianity.
Oh yeah, I like that. Why God Why we're going in these series. I like focusing. I like having these times to dive in, and then time to reflect. So I like to react to people. So let's swing it around to Amanda.
I was going to say this: if you have questions, send them in. That would be my thing. We want to hear from you and truly answer the questions you don't feel comfortable asking in church. So send them in.
That's good. I agree very much.
If you listen to the episodes, there's a wonderful introduction.
You've heard me ask for feedback plenty of times now.
Bring it.
But thinking of this season we did, I found a common thread kind of throughout all the episodes that was both sobering, challenging, and encouraging. And it was, with all these topics, I feel, whether we're talking about Christianity and beauty, or diversity, or politics, or science, our relationship with science, I think what we discovered in each conversation, which was really cool, was these are very real, valid, poignant questions of the credibility when looking at different parts of the church or different moments of the church, especially in our time and place. These are real idols. These are real concerns and traps that need reckoning with, that we haven't always maintained a healthy relationship with as a church, and this critique is valid. But the really striking and cool thing is in each of these categories, when we look at Christian history and when we look especially at the roots of our faith in Christ, be it the Sermon on the Mount, his whole ministry and posture of incarnation, life alongside and deep relationship, crucifixion, the challenges we're bringing, and when we're saying the church isn't diverse enough, you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, the church was such a big, like a countercultural instigator for diversity in the first century, right after Jesus' resurrection. When we talk about science, whether it's Judeo-Christian history, like we were talking about with Drew, was such a force for good and inspiration and growth in the sciences. Politics, again, like I mentioned before, Jesus challenged the political idols of the zealots and of those hyper-aligned with Rome in his time and brought together a family of disciples across lines. All of these things, faith and beauty, of course, as well, wrapping in there. There's the answer to our problems, the answer to these tensions, these questions of credibility actually come from the rich rooting of the faith. And it's more remembering that we're called to, I think, in this moment. And a healthy remembering, but that's so encouraging that it is in fact a remembering, and that there is such rich depth and beauty when we ask these questions well, and sit with what's been and perhaps how we've strayed. That's been cool to hear episode after episode.
I resonate so much with that, and if Aaron wants it, we'll give him the final word after this. But so as you were talking, and as I was thinking about this recap, there's kind of this, I wish I could see it, but it was on HBO and I'm not willing to pay the money for it. But there's this TV show, Newsroom, that has this clip that's super viral. I believe it's Jeff Daniels. He was also in Dumb and Dumber. But, he's answering these questions about America and the news, and he goes on a not suitable for work or church tirade, but one of his last questions was, we didn't scare so easily. And I listen to all of these episodes and I think about my message to Christians, like, what if you didn't scare so easily? What if you could sit with the hard topics? And then I'd say to our deconstructing, doubting, even people that have never been to church in their life, what would it look like to not scare so easily and to open yourself up for these very complex topics and to be able to acknowledge they're super complex, and maybe my first reaction isn't necessarily the best reaction, or maybe I can own it. And I just want to leave you with something practical, which is, when you hear an episode, whether you attend church or not, and you begin to feel it, I want to send an email, I want to send a tweet, I want to send a comment, whatever side of the political space you're on, wherever you are, my wife would ask you, what's happening inside of you right now? What's really happening? And we have the audacity to believe that God is very present. Last I checked, I believe that Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead. And if I follow that Jesus, which I do, I don't need to be as scared as much.
Well, Peter, that was beautiful. I think again of Bryant, taking it, the racism, all these feelings, these feelings that you're talking about, Peter. How can we turn to God with those and say, Lord, how do you lead me in these conversations? How do you lead me? And what will flow from that are the fruits: gentleness, kindness, self-control, compassion. And when people start seeing that, whether they are Christians, non-Christians, that is the beauty of God being displayed in our world. And so that's my prayer and hope, that we can become people who more and more are not able to scare so easily, but are able to share and spread beauty and compassion and love even easier.
What a great place to close. Thank you so much for joining us on this recap episode. We'll see you next week and then again in May when we do questions of our day.